this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. Welcome to this week's episode. This week is a longer episode as we had the amazing New York storyteller Laura Sims on as a guest. I'm still blown away by how incredible she was and all the information and wisdom and knowledge that she shared. And I'll have to listen to the episode again and again to get all of the things out of it that she shared. I hope you enjoy this longer episode, but I promise you are in for a treat. Here's Laura. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we've got Laura Sims on the podcast, who is in New York in the United States. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
It's lovely to have you here. Can you tell me about your storytelling journey, where you started, where you've been, what you're doing now?
Well, it's a long journey since when I began. It's a time my son calls the long ago time. But I began telling stories here in New York City around 1969. And it was sort of accidental, actually. I had gone to graduate school quite young, too young, and I dropped out. And I came back to the city, and I thought I had been so shy. I loved literature. I loved philosophy. I was interested in C.G. Jung and Anais Nin and Joseph Campbell. And so I decided that I would do all the things that made me really nervous. So I took a theater class and a poetry class at the new school, which is now just up the street from here. In this theater class, which turned out to be a very experimental class taught by Ria Geisner of the Open Theater at the time, it wasn't learning monologues, but it was really observing and being interested in the physicality of character and the intuition and improvisation of performance. And during it, I auditioned at her behest for a theater production at La Mama Theater, which, if anybody knows New York, is a very experimental theater on the Lower East Side. And it was a great director, the director who had brought, wonderful French theater productions to New York, etc. And I got the role immediately of a geisha girl who went into trance, threw off her kimono, and became a Native American roller skater who spoke in Swedish. So I got this because I've always been able to listen to accents. And so I had this kind of make-believe Swedish, which, so this role, although it was a sort of fantastic play, actually, she was a genius, meant that my job that I had as a roller skating waitress in a jazz club on the Bowery, I couldn't continue. Everyone else was in the union, was a sort of well-known actor or actress, but I had this sort of odd capacity. So she said, well, you have to be here for all 8 performances and rehearsals and so on. Well, you should teach children theater. Well, I cannot memorize. I can't memorize. I couldn't memorize then. I can't memorize now. So I had all the children, young children, 10 to 13 years old, of very well-known actors and actresses of New York, come to my living room, and I would tell them a fairy tale because I grew up loving these stories as a child. And then we would act them out and create scenes and songs and poetry and so on. So we took it to Central Park, in which we have this illustrious and fantastic audience in front of the Hans Christian Andersen statue. Parents, of course, loved it, wanted their kids to repeat it, but their children felt it was unprofessional to not have some interim event. And they said, Laura, do a monologue. But of course, I don't have a monologue at the time. So I told a Russian fairy tale. In experimental theater at the time, the idea, the quest, was to find a way to break down the fourth wall and have an immediacy, an uncanny and direct relationship with audiences. And while I was telling a Russian fairy tale called Alenushka and Ivanushka, about two children whose parents were dead and they had decided to walk across the whole world and never be unhappy, I suddenly found myself experiencing the very thing that we were seeking in experimental theater, in this very seemingly structured event. So I was meant to go back to graduate school, but I was so penetrated by this experience that I thought, well, I'll just take off another year and then I'll go back. I was going to become a medieval scholar, by the way. So I began to investigate traditional ritual dance dramas, and somehow again through an accident got a job at the American Museum of Natural History because I was hanging out in their library reading mythology, reading stories of Inuit shamans and African healers and mythology. So I got a job as a storyteller in the Peace Center that was being created at the time. And then I worked in the galleries. I did that for nearly 15, 16 years. So every week I had to come up with a story. And my teachers were not librarians or, the usual sort of journey that people took at the time, and there weren't many other storytellers. So I watched films. They sent me to Joseph Campbell's first workshop that he gave. And I met, met amazing people who had experienced storytellers in other places in the world. And I met indigenous storytellers at the museum, and then was hired by the Brooklyn Museum when the Dogon dancers came to narrate their mythology. And so it brought my whole life shifted. And never did I ever leave this quest to understand, not so, well, of course, we're all obsessed with the stories and what they mean and their effect, but I was always wanting to know, what was this that happened between myself and my audience? And it became the foundation of all of my studies and my explorations to understand what was so completely unique about an art form that had lost its place in the world. Many, many people began to be reciting stories, memorizing texts, and performing, particularly for children and so forth. But this interest of mine has prevailed, and it is now 50 years, more than 50 years. So that's the background which I've been thinking about lately, because my parents were always thinking, what are you going to do? I mean, when are you going to grow up and do something? But this summons felt to me very much like characters in fairy tales who something happens and then you leave your conventional world to go out to seek something. And, my life has been filled with the most miraculous and auspicious events, and also so many difficulties that come when you decide to do something that is so outside convention and outside the box. My experimental theater, people thought I had completely lost my mind and that I'd gone completely awry when the very thing that I had come to seemed to me the essence of what we were all seeking, except because of the structure of the engagement, because of the structure of the narrative and the way that audiences listen, that structure is just the sort of outer husk of the event. But what can happen within it is so powerful. And perhaps now that I'm getting older, I feel, and the world is shifting so much, that this is needed, if not urgently needed, to repair the dissociation and disconnection from the sacred and from the heart that we are all suffering from, really.
Oh, I have so many questions. So many questions. Can you talk more about the effect that you've experienced? I mean, 50 years is a long time to be doing this work. The effect that you've seen in other people and in yourself, like do the stories work on you too, in your experience?
Well, I couldn't tell a story with any authenticity or responsibility if it didn't affect me.
Mm.
And the capacity that I've had to work on, and quite challenging, is to discern between when I'm truly being touched by something and when I have an interpretation of what I think is happening. So that has really given me the greatest gift of all, to learn how to begin to discern how a story functions and how meaning functions when a story is in reciprocity, spoken. And what is the role of the narrator? What is the role of the storyteller in this performance that could be really just entertainment, and also psychological therapy, and all these things are valid and have their benefits in the world. But what I wanted to understand mostly was, what is it about language and sound and image? And maybe it's closer to how Indigenous people have understood that this problem of individualism is not about uniqueness, but has separated us from a sensitivity, innate intuition to know that things are interrelated. So all of this is part of, I can now consider myself an elder. And it's just a fluke. I'm sort of this random accident that I could spend all this time. And you said, oh, what a long time. And now I feel it's been a very short time to understand, to recognize something so profoundly unconventional, that is very grounded. I once had a dream last year that I felt was the gift of the storyteller dreaming in me that knows much more than I do. And the first night of this dream, my fingers were sort of like intertwining. And I just saw them and thought, oh, things are connected. And then I woke up. And the next night, I was actually in the same place. I was on the shore of overlooking a tumultuous ocean. And I looked out and there was a kind of whirlpool. And I looked, and you know how you can see in a dream that what you can't see in your everyday. And there was someone drowning. And I thought, it's me, I'm drowning. And suddenly there was someone next to me, and I said, can you save her? And whoever it was said, no, you can. I woke up and I thought, oh. And as the day progressed, I thought, oh, what an amazing dream. It was the dream of the storyteller. I was on the shore, watching, aware of the ocean, the person drowning, the sky, and so forth. And I was also immersed in the story.
I wonder, you know, that
The
intersection.
third dream, I'm just going to tell you the third
Right.
one. And hold on that question, that good question. People are not getting to see your wonderful face during this. The joy on your face. The third one was the same dream again. There I was standing on the shore, seeing the tumultuous, and I expected in this whirlpool that I'd see myself coming out of it, but up came like a little girl's jewelry box. And it was like gold and painted. And I said, what is that? And a voice said, beauty.
Oh, that's lovely. I think that, you know, you're so right that the dreams have deep messages for us, but in story, that intersection between the dream state and the dreamlike state that people go in when they're listening, but also as a teller, we almost go into this dreamlike state because we're in the dream. Yeah, I just find that really interesting. Yeah, really the intersection between dreaming and being part of the story moment.
Well, I think that if we get lost too much in the dream, there is no narrator there
Mm.
for the thinking mind of the listener that needs to follow. And we don't want to drown people. I remember listening to a storyteller once, and I felt very distressed because I thought there was no difference between her and the story. She wasn't there for us, and it kept getting more and more emotional and more lost, like being in the story, and there was no difference between the character and the narrator or anything else. And I wanted to break loose because I could neither really listen to the story and I felt I was drowning. And I think we are so trained in seeing the narrative as the story. We are so trained in reading where there is no living narrator. There may be a character of a narrator or this kind of wonderful invisible author who gives you the narration, but there's no living presence of a narrator who is aware of the temperature in the room, who has done their work, as you said before so beautifully, has done their work and has a sense of what they are triggered by, what happens to them because of a story, what might happen to the audience, not knowing ever completely what happens to the audience. And there's that sense of groundedness and a sense of being able to be in the story. It's a very expanded state of mind and a very grounded state of mind. I was very lucky to meet, many indigenous storytellers, and also observe events and realize that you could go into a trance and never come back from it. You could romanticize the whole thing. You could actually infiltrate the telling with all of what you think it means and what other people should think it means, and miss the entire alchemy of what can happen to someone. So I think it's a very, on one hand, so ordinary, and the other, it's quite complex and alive. So I've dedicated the rest of my life, whether it's going to be another week or 10 or 20 years, whatever it is, to trying to discern and help storytellers to find more ways to recognize, using whoever they are and what, our lives, our experience, our own particular talents and so forth, but to understand what's possible for a listener, to begin to have some indigenous state of mind. When I was first learning to be a storyteller, through another series of kind of strange accidents, I met someone who was studying meditation with a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. And I went to meet him. In those days, you didn't have like hundreds of people. So you just go to meet someone. And when I said I was a storyteller, he said to me, well, you'll have to stop collecting stories. And I thought, this is all I do. And he said, no, you'll have to open completely to your gentleness. And that was a lesson that I had to sort of ponder and explore. And then the next day I went and took meditation instruction and went on a long meditation retreat and kept seeing that it was so different from what I thought or assumed meditation was. But it was just that, the capacity to be present and discern between my thoughts, the natural state of space of my mind, and see others as I do in my whole Brooklyn, New York neurotic way, but discern that I'm seeing it that way and look again and see what's actually taking place. So that training, which, I'm not a great meditator by any means, or even a great storyteller by any means. I just kept and just keep exploring what I think is so extraordinary in this event, the very thing that unknowingly and without any understanding at all, I sensed in Central Park telling this Russian fairy tale.
Just magical, isn't it? That moment where you just are in it. You said something about, again, I've got notes everywhere, open to your gentleness. And I got tingles all over my body from that and had a visceral tear up reaction to open to your gentleness. It's a very, very powerful statement. When you were talking about being grounded and expansive, those two things seeming conflict with each other, but it's also so it's like being a tree, isn't it? It's like you're grounded in the earth and you're also reaching out and embracing the story and whoever's listening. It's just,
And
just some
inside
beautiful
you
imagery. Yeah.
are levels and levels of structures within a trunk or a stem of a flower with so much dynamic energy of drawing forth moisture, nutrients. It's well, one thing that I've had to come to learn and to trust, and how interesting it is here. Of course, people are hearing our voices. They don't know that we're on this Zoom and we actually see each other. But that experience that you had makes me so happy, of this kind of, it is inexplicable, really. And it's not that we should put up on our bulletin boards, open to your gentleness. That was a transmission that I had. And for me, the storytelling, because of how voice works, how presence works, is a transmission of that, of a direct experience. So that if that occurs between myself and an audience, then I know that I'm offering people, maybe they're going to leave with a message and, therefore I should blah, blah, blah. This story means that, and this is related to my life in this way. All those things are there and of value. But something has opened up inside of us that makes us more available to being in the world, to those parts of living that in our contemporary world are not as valued. The invisible world, the sensitivity, the intuition, the spontaneity and creativity, the directness, the feeling of like a sort of an innate sense, regardless of circumstances, of being alive, which you could be in the midst. I've been in refugee camps where people have not had much to eat and they've lost everything. And listening to a story, at the end, they'll say, "You didn't change our lives." But for a moment, we remembered that we have joy. I do want to tell you a little story, and it's not a traditional story, but I just finished. I told you I've been so sort of like consumed because I've been writing 2 books at once, and I finished one yesterday.
Congratulations.
Like the 4th or 5th revision, which is probably just along the path, was done, but I needed an introduction. And I wanted the introduction not to explain everything about telling stories to someone who's dying, but I wanted it to be felt somehow. And I was early on, as part of this consistent, insisting, persevering exploration of this art form, I was telling stories on an oncology ward in a hospital on 18th Street. And it was very narrow, windowless, airless, faded yellow walled room filled with people. But my audience, to my surprise, were people in wheelchairs, swaddled in blankets or lying, have been rolled in on stretchers. And one woman sitting not far from me, her robe completely open. And she had a scar from her neck all the way down, like a thick rope. I was young and it was like, oh my goodness. And I decided that I would tell a fairy tale that to me was like the quintessential healing journey. And I had told it in so many situations because I just did not know what to do. When I had said hello, nobody really related to me. They kind of was seeing me, but it was like, oh. So I began, and like 3 minutes in, hardly touched the turning point of the story. There was a king who had 2 treasures. He had 3 sons who he loved beyond life itself, and a tree that grew in the royal court that once a year bloomed 3 golden apples. Well, I had hardly gone to that when I noticed that my entire audience had fallen asleep. So I didn't want to disturb people. So I whispered and I said, if you would like me to stop and leave, I can go. And all of a sudden, several people, like frogs under the water, eyes open, said, no, please continue. So I went on with the story. There was, indeed, if anyone could pick and eat those apples, there would be no hunger in the world. But for those 3 nights, at midnight, a monster came into that garden and each night took 1 golden apple. So the king called his 3 sons when they're of age and said, sons, whichever one of you can actually slay that monster and, get at least one of the golden apples, you can become the king. Well, everybody was back to sleep. So I just kept going. And there was nothing familiar that I could hold on to in the responsiveness, as you know so well. You have people who are suddenly their eyes are open or they're leaning forward, or you have a feeling of their being present, or they laugh, or no, nothing. So it was as if I was almost talking into their dream world, summoning up images and having this experience myself, but I couldn't just have it myself because I had this feeling that my voice and this story, the words of this story, were like their sleeping pill. And then somehow I had to keep going. When it was over, suddenly, to my complete sort of astonishment, because basically I thought, I have got to get out of here as quickly as I can. Everybody sort of woke up and there was like applause and thank you. I sort of like, what was that? And the open robed sighing woman said to me, she grabbed my hand and she kissed my hand. And she said, I haven't been able to sleep. Thank you for that story.
Mm.
And then a man said to me, I'm so glad that that third prince who had such a hard time finally got to marry the incredible princess from the other world. Who knew anyone had listened whatsoever?
Mm.
And if I thought I had experienced something the first time I told the story, this was like, what happened here?
Mm.
This was even more of that. And yet, I couldn't go around and interview everyone. But then I sort of signed up to tell stories there every week. Because like, what was this? It's actually a great story. And I recently realized when I was trying to find the original source that I had read, that I had sort of confused 3 different stories into one.
Ah.
And that was like, oh, I don't even remember how and when it happened. But then I thought, oh, this is how stories have functioned all the time. Somebody is, left the marketplace in Marrakesh and is on their caravan on their way back to Central Asia, and someone tells them a story, and then they stop somewhere in another country and they hear it. And then there's something about, I don't know, our relationship to these stories. And these stories take a form, but they keep changing. And that then someone comes along and hears the story told and writes it down. And there's this fixed form. Like everyone loves the writing of this story, which I've called the Three Golden Apples. And they love this story. So where did you get it? And I at first was sort of embarrassed in the fact that I sort of like mixed it up. There I am again, in my crazy mind. But as I have told this story so often, I was hired once by Lincoln Center to do this aesthetics education where you go to schools and tell stories. And basically, I was supposed to be in third and fourth grade, elementary schools, and they said you'll have about 36. And I had like 120 performances that year. And sometimes I'd be in high schools where the kids were like, oh man, what's she gonna do? In Brooklyn in a kindergarten, telling that same story.
That's amazing. I really I'm looking forward to reading the book. So tell me about these books you've been writing. Tell me what are they about? Are they storytelling books?
I don't really know much of anything else. Well, this book is called Embers, Storytelling and Dying.
Okay.
And it started as a journal that I kept on Facebook and for family and friends while I was with my brother dying. My brother was dying. And when I read over these excerpts, I thought that maybe it would be helpful to other people. So then I have spent the last year kind of revising it and remembering what really took place between my brother and I as a way of supporting people who were with the dying, and how my brother and I told stories to each other about our lives, and how personally to deal with the intense complexity of emotions. Because for a long time I was on Zoom with him because it was during COVID and my brother lives in New Zealand, your neighbor, but so far away. And then I got to be with him twice and to be with him the day he died. Um, so that was an incredible experience, but I felt that it would help people to feel more courage about, because I didn't know what to do. And again, just like that experience in the hospital, I didn't know what really was reaching my brother. So that's one book. The other is a book that took me about 10 years to write. And I took it back from a publisher because the contract didn't want to include the botanical drawings that went with it. And I felt they were important. So now I'm sending it out. And that's called The Story of Wild Rose, Summoning the Restoration of the World. And that's a book that's about one single Romanian fairy tale. And it's about the relationship between botany, mythology, storytelling, and my life as a storyteller.
They both sound magic.
That's, you use that word, and of course I love that word too. So I wondered what you mean by magic.
Magic is like for me, it's the ethereal spaces, all the things you were talking about before, things that we don't talk about, things that we feel and we know, but we don't. It's the tingles on the arm, it's the gut feeling, it's all of those that magic. It's soul-driven stuff. That's what
Mm.
magic is for me,
Yeah,
soul-driven
that's what
things.
happens.
Mm.
I mean, my Tibetan Buddhist teacher used to call it ordinary magic.
Mm. Yeah.
And I always loved that because, maybe I should tell you a story. And I want to say that I heard this story told to me in a roundabout in the UK by wonderful English storyteller, Pom Clayton. And we were going off somewhere. And because we both got involved in her telling me this story, we kept going around the roundabout. But it's a very short story about magic. And I think It's a story. For me, I think it's from Morocco. I don't really know, and she can't remember who told it to her, because I think Ben Haggerty had told it to her, but he heard it from someone else. So excuse me for not giving you a real source, but I'm giving you my people source. There was a boy who was very poor, and one day he went to market, and everything he saw, he wished he could have, but he couldn't have anything because he had no money. And in the middle of the marketplace, there was a performance. A magician was performing his magic. And he would touch something and it would turn to gold. And he would give it to somebody in the audience. And the boy was absolutely astonished. And the magician saw him and said, "Oh, you like my magic." And the boy said, "Yes." "Would you like some gold?" "Yes." So a little mouse ran by, and the magician touched the mouse. It turned to gold. He gave it to the boy. But the boy said, "I want more." So one thing after another, he turns to gold. A dog, a whole souk, a field of cows. And finally, the magician said, and each time the boy would say, "I want more." Finally, the magician said, "What do you want?" And the boy said, "I want a magic finger." Now, I often tell this story tucked inside a story of something happened to me, because one thing that I've learned very long ago in this journey is that we have separated the traditional stories into one sort of category as almost magical and not real. And then in this contemporary world, this idea of telling personal stories, preoccupied with our own lives and saying the other stories are make believe,
Mm.
they're separate. But for me, these traditional stories, because of the voice of the storyteller, and if the storyteller's done their work, are deeply personal, because they let us feel all that you've been talking about. That is not separate from our everyday walk down the street and not get hit by a car world. So I have tucked very often in and out of traditional stories, the stories of my life, or framed the story of my life and inside as a fairy tale with other stories inside of it. Because also, once you have that expansive state of mind, people are not remembering to remember. It's a spontaneous occurrence because they're making the story come to life. It's almost walking down the street memory. But so I tell a story of working at the United Nations with a group of kids, 57 kids from troubled places in the world. And there was one boy, not the boy I adopted, by the way, but another child soldier from Sierra Leone, who had wanted me to sort of help him stay here in the States illegally. And I was really pondering doing it when the head of UNICEF at the time really caught on, because he said, "Laura, don't tell anybody." But of course, he told everybody. And I was really, like, do not do this, because all these kids in the future, governments may not give us visas for children. If our artists are going to let them illegally stay here, and what is he going to do, be on the street? So I had to tell him that I couldn't do it, and he was furious with me. But when we were leaving in the lobby of the Y, where all these kids were staying, which is not a very luxurious place whatsoever, but to most of these kids, this was an amazing place. There were radiators and beds and 3 meals a day. But I begged to take him in a taxi cab because I could see that he was sobbing. He did not want to go back to the war. But of course, I wasn't trusted by the head of UNICEF, and she assigned this kind of warrior-like woman from Norway, who was the head of, at the time, part of Norwegian People's Aid, to go with us in case I decided like to drop him off in Queens or something. And anyway, but he was in the middle. I was on one side, she was on the other side, and his sobbing. And all I could think about was, oh my God, you can't let this boy go back on an airplane so traumatized, because you need some grounding, you need some sanity to survive situations, to make choices. You can't, when he gets back there. So I finally said, listen, I don't know what to do, but how can I help you right now in this taxi? And he said, tell me a story. You have to realize these are kids who grew up before the war, hearing stories. They knew what we're talking about. Maybe not intellectually, but they knew this about story. And the only story that came to my mind was the magician's story. And I thought, oh my God, okay. Does it really matter? Just tell the story, because maybe the telling of the story will allow him to calm down and focus, because he wants to know what's going to happen next. Which I found in these emergency situations often to be the true medicine. Not the lesson in the story, but what's happening. So I told the story, and at the end, the woman from Norwegian People's Aid, of course, who was also listening, just said to me, Laura, what kind of story is that? And the boy said, I know what kind of story that is, because I need a magic finger.
So lovely. I want to ask you some other things, but we're going to run out of time. This podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling, and we have talked about so many incredible things. I cannot wait to listen back, actually, because I know I would have missed some really great things that you've said. So what do you think is at the heart of storytelling?
I have a quote up on my wall from the great Canadian writer, translator, poet, Robert Bringhurst. Says a story is not a house, it is an occurrence.
Mm.
So maybe at the heart of story is reciprocity.
Mm.
And a way of being that is engendered because of the listening, that lets us once again live in the world, connected to each other. It may be our only antidote to the rise of fascism and the sort of ignorant and ignorant increase of violence and bias in the face of this massive response of the natural world that is causing so much damage. It may be the only way.
Mm.
So that's what I think.
Mm. That is wonderful. So I did have a little question. Did you ever go and study medieval, become do any medieval studies or anything? Did you find medieval stories?
No, well, those are very literary and interesting stories, because I think it's a time when there was still a lot of recognition of symbolism. And no, I never did. I never went back to graduate school. And sometimes I thought, oh, if I went to graduate school, I could have a position, a paying position somewhere. But no, I never did,
Oh,
because I had to
look,
keep going, looking beyond that.
yeah,
But I am
life has
teaching
different
all the
plans.
time, and I'm teaching a lot on Zoom actually now. And actually, I mean, how we
Mm,
came is through wonderful Sally Riddle
yes.
in Australia. So I do a series of things, and one individually, I do something called the mentorship. Somebody could train, for instance, like take storytelling 101, individually or in a small group. Or if someone is working on a project, I'm working with a woman now who has a remarkable memoir that she's actually writing, but she eventually wants to also do a kind of performance of, which has to do with her love of Haitian art that brought her to Haiti, where accidentally on the airplane she met her husband, who was not Haitian, but Greek, and was a great scientist and engineer who at the time would probably like fall over in conversation like this that we're having. But eventually he wanted to row across the Atlantic Ocean, and he was killed by enormous waves. It changed her life, and her grief was such that she eventually went back to be initiated into which is what like Haitian voodoo, which is different in Santeria in Brazil. And her deity of choice, the one who has protected her, was Yamasha, the mother of the waters. So, so we've been working on how do you tell, how do you tell that story with the complexity of all these other things? So I do that. I, work with different people individually. My favorite course I'm teaching now is called the Great Story Immersion.
Mm.
And we work collaboratively, up to 12 people only, on one remarkable fairy tale for 8 to 10 weeks, and really do, look into that story so that we are training ourselves to look beyond our interpretation, or to look beyond the narrative recasting of the story, which is needed for the written page, to see what's actually in it. So those are just luscious. And so I love doing that. And of course, I love telling stories so that I can make someone like you feel your wonderful vibrating chills. Set your house of treasure vibrating.
I imagine that over the time you've been doing storytelling, things would have changed. That has the storytelling landscape changed in the United States or wherever, you're telling
You,
stories?
I mean, in the beginning, those of us who were telling stories in the late 1970s, in UK and so forth, there was a lot more natural relationship to
Yeah.
the global literature, particularly, Celtic English, Scottish, and, all those collections in the late 1800s of global stories recast by Westerners and
Mhm.
collections and so forth, and anthropology. And then in the West now, like in America, what's really most fashionable are like the moth and telling personal stories. So, and also storytelling. There's huge storytelling festivals everywhere. So that didn't exist. You had Ben in the UK with Beyond the Borders and his Crick Crack Club, which was marvelous and early on in those things, and other people, in different places in the world, more and more creating storytelling. And you have a lot of interest in storytelling for business and storytelling for coaching and storytelling for healing. And so that's a landscape. And people who are really good at media and sales and branding, or fall in love with AI and so forth, um, set out to recite and tell stories because of their meaning to change us. And that's one thing that's really happened. So in regard to that, there's everything from people like Lisa Bloom in Israel, who's a great story coach, who really is working with what's the story inside of us that comes alive, to people who use story to brand and sell things. I mean, we just witnessed an election where false stories that manipulate, which is really how, fascism is, where you could convince somebody because of the power of image and how it's being presented, you could cause a genocide where you could see your neighbor as a cockroach or a vermin. That's another way in which storytelling can be used. So I don't see it as such a romantic idea of storytelling. I still think we have to look and make some really big choices, and also challenge ourselves to look beyond what we think we're doing and or being so clever at, because we are in a very dangerous moment in history. And we know from all the artists and writers, as Toni Morris and others have pointed out, that really understanding the nature, the utterance of words, and how, we can reach people to keep alive something that has integrity and curiosity and creativity and heart, as you're saying, as opposed to becoming just enamored because we can do it of a story that makes a particular kind of meaning or points towards something, or this, therefore one should be kind, and never penetrate the mind that repeats itself over and over again unless we open to the heart.
I usually finish off by asking if you've got any advice, but this whole interview has been full of wisdom for me about presence and purpose and trusting and the bigger picture. It's just been full of so much. But I'll offer the question anyway. Is there any advice that you think storytellers might get something from you that you could pass on today?
Well, I think it would be wonderful if all of us really devoted a time of every day to discovering the difference between being present and being busy. Because even though it would appear that that's so little, mindfulness is movement is very powerful and important. It teaches us to focus, but it also can make us be very good rulers and hunters. So we need to also generate an awareness that gives us a sensitivity to completely keep, I think, just be curious. Really be curious about mind, be curious about what is the nature of compassion, and recognize that we may soon be in a position where when we tell certain stories, if they're too obvious, that we may be stopped. So to begin to understand the relationship between a storyteller and listener, not conceptually and viscerally. It's and also I'd love if people are interested in ever taking a class or doing a mentorship. I would just love to be contacted, and there are students I've worked with who are so wonderful, who are beginning to teach. Not that people are doing the wrong thing, but that we can just expand or open our view a little bit so that we know more about the unique possibilities of this art form, what are really unique to it. So, we're always saying that's great theater, or a theater person saying, I've been telling stories all along. And sometimes people are actually magnificent and they're wonderful and they do so much for us. But I don't want to forget about what is really singularly unique to this particular art form that we have not investigated, because it means investigating the nature of our own mind and what is language, really. For a long time, people didn't write down stories, not because they were ignorant, but because a word, as the Inuit say, was like magic. A human being could become an animal, and an animal could become a human being. So in our literal mind, that's like, wow. But in the mind of a storyteller, that's understood differently.
So how can people find you if they want to find out about your courses and your offerings?
Well, I think the two best ways are my website, which you can put on, my unfinished website, and my email, which you're welcome to post as well. People can write to me.
Okay.
I like to tailor make the situation for people so that, because people come with different experiences, and it's always good to start where you are and not think that, because you've memorized texts for 24 years, that you can't do something different, but you can continue to do what you do, but deepen it, enrich
You
it.
you have been absolutely wonderful. I'll put all those contact details in the show notes. But I'm overwhelmed with gratitude at all the wisdom that you've shared today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, that's what happens when you wake me up so early in the morning. Something smarter than me thinks.
If you've enjoyed the podcast and would like to support me to continue the work that I'm doing, please head to buymeacoffee.com/Alyssa Curtain and make a donation or sign up for a subscription. This is a passion project, and as such, it is voluntary. So your donations make it easier for me to continue this work. Thank you for your support. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.